Thank you so much for joining us for our Brown Bag webinar today. Today's presentation is developing and hosting your own cybersecurity competition. If you haven't already, some of you are already doing this, please put your name and your school in the chat box. We have a good record of the attendance today. There should be time at the end for Q&A. So if any questions or comments come up during the presentation, please put those in the chat box as well. Please note also, there will be a short survey, very short survey for everybody at the very end of this half hour. So we'll give you that link at the top of the hour, okay? So our presenter today is Andrew Lutz. He is currently the chair of the Information Technology Networking Department and the head of the Cyber Center for Johnson County Community College in Overland Park, Kansas. Andrew has been working in the IT industry for over 12 years and has held various roles, including IT director. He specializes in IT leadership, network and systems administration, security and project management. His certifications include CCNA, Cisco CyberOps Associate, Security Plus A+, and PMP. So we definitely thank Andrew for his time and expertise today. I'm now going to turn it over to him.
Well, thank you again, Mark, for the invitation to come and present today. I appreciate it. I'm Andrew Lutz, Associate Professor of Information Technology from Johnson County Community College, Overland Park, Kansas, as Mark said. That's a suburb, really, of the Kansas City area, if you're familiar with that area of the country. And so what I want to talk to you about today is developing and hosting your own cybersecurity competition. And so really what I'm hoping to do is provide our lessons learned as we went through this process so that if it is something you're interested in, maybe you can take a few things away from this that would be beneficial to you as you work on developing one yourself. I know we have a lot of really experienced and wise individuals on this Zoom session. But hopefully there's something you could take away if this is something you're interested in, and it may help you to determine if you are interested in it as well. So a little bit of backstory to start on why we went this direction. And so I'm venturing to guess many of you are familiar with the National Cyber League. And if not, if you did a web search, you could find information on that very easily. But that's a national competition in cybersecurity. And we've been doing that for a few years. And our students really have enjoyed that. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback on that. And that really got us thinking, what can we do in our own institution, in our own department to maybe develop our own? And the reason for doing that really was, well, one, we knew students liked it, but we wanted to develop something of our own that we could control, we could develop, and we could create engagement around with our students that they could get excited about. And so that's really kind of what spawned the idea. We still intend to do the National Cyber League, so nothing has changed there. That's been a great thing for our students. If you're not familiar with it, I'd investigate that as well. They have a lot of good challenges, and they have a lot of steps that students can follow to really understand how to do the challenges in the gymnasium portion, which is before the competition begins. So anyhow, but that's kind of how this idea came to be for our department. So as we started planning this competition, here are some of the things that we learned after the fact or during the fact of doing that, and that I'd recommend anyone who's interested at least consider. So ask yourself a question of what skills are you hoping students master? And I would ask this very early on, maybe not immediately, but early. And the reason I say that is there are so many challenges you can develop for students to work on, so many labs you can develop for students to work on, that if you don't do that right away, or at least early on, you may find yourself going in a lot of different directions. And if you're like us, we have a narrow time frame to complete a lot of initiatives at the institution. And so we needed to complete this by a certain date. So that's something I think we could have done better, is could have started off maybe narrowing our focus a little bit. So that's something I'd recommend you think about so you don't get pulled in too many different directions if you're on a timeline to complete your competition development. Ask yourself, what lab resources do you have available? And I write physical or virtual there for a specific reason. So virtual would be the preference. If you can leverage that, that's going to do you a lot of favors as you work on this. And so the reason being, in virtualization, we can quickly clone machines and deploy them And it's an easy way to do that. And if something goes wrong, we need to redeploy one. It's very fast. And so for us, what we have is a virtual environment called VMware vSphere that we use. And that's more of a centralized management type system that allows us to do that very, very easily. And so if you don't have something like that, which I imagine some institutions wouldn't, then you certainly could still do this on a classroom full of physical machines, where maybe you use something like VirtualBox, which is a free virtualization product. And within that physical machine, you could have maybe an attack machine and a victim machine, and they can interact with one another on that physical machine, as long as you have sufficient computing and memory resources to do that. But I think that's a viable option as well. If you're going to do it without any virtualization and pure physical machines, you still could accomplish that. I think that would be more difficult though. And then you'd need more physical machines, one physical machine, say for a victim station, one for an attack, and then maybe it gets a little more resource dependent. So leverage virtualization when you can would be my recommendation. It'll make it a lot easier as you test things as well, not just the final product, but as you go through testing things, and you can take snapshots to save progress when you try things and revert back, and it's just a lot easier. Make sure rules of engagement are clear. And so this is really important in my view, and I think it's something you should think about if this is of interest to you. And so what I'm really talking about there is make sure students understand that they're using penetration testing techniques, that if they use these on a production network, then that could very well be illegal, and most likely is. And so they need to understand that these techniques are to be used in this competition, in this isolated environment, so that they don't run into the risk of doing something unintentionally where it could be illegal. And so what we did for that is we actually developed a form that students needed to acknowledge before they were able to compete in the competition, just to make sure that they really were clear in understanding that. And also on this front, I would recommend just making extra sure that wherever you're planning to do this competition, if it's purely virtualization, great. If it's physical machines using virtualization, great. But however you decide to do it, make sure that's isolated, and make sure students can try all kinds of things in that environment, and it's isolated. It's not going to get out of that environment, however you set that up or configure it. Because students will try things. Obviously, they're trying to exploit different devices. So lots of things will be tried. And what you don't want is unintentionally some traffic getting out of that, what should be an isolated network, and maybe they accidentally attack a device from another class or something, whatever it might be. So those are really important things to make sure are understood upfront and planned for upfront, I think. Consider integrating it into a class would be a recommendation I think I would offer just to consider. And so we have an ethical hacking course here at our institution that aligns with the CompTIA Pen Test Plus certification, and we integrated our competition with that course. And so this is our second semester. We first did the competition in the spring, and now we just wrapped it up this fall, actually. And I think there's a couple of benefits to doing that. It makes a good pilot, because you're going to have folks who will participate if it's part of the course, right? And the other advantage is that students are already going to be working on those competencies. So they'll be pretty well prepared to compete in this. Whereas if you had a wider net and students outside of that course, I think it'd be harder to run that pilot and get some initial results. So that's just an opinion, something to think about. We're doing that thus far. I will say that we hope to expand that to more courses or a departmental-wide type competition, maybe at some point in the future. We're not exactly sure logistically how we do that at this point. But as a starting point, I think that's a good way to go. It helps narrow the focus. Have some interesting prizes. I had to put that in there because I think it's relevant. I think it helps get students excited about competing in the competition. And so I can tell you what we do. As an example, we offer a voucher for the CompTIA Pen Test Plus certification. Now that's not an insignificant cost, right? That's a pretty high value item. And in addition to that, we offer the alternative of a USB storage drive if they'd rather have that. But what I'll tell you is the storage drive we offer is a lot less in value compared to the certification. We do that intentionally because we want to encourage students to pursue certification. But whatever you come up with on that, I think is a good thing for students. Some resources and strategies to learn cybersecurity and ethical hacking, really penetration testing as well. Focus on industry certifications is a good thing to think about doing. And what we're really talking about here is not just for students, but also for faculty. So it depends on your department and obviously where kind of everybody is. But in some cases, faculty may need some professional development in this area in order to teach it, right? And so I think looking at well-known industry certifications is very helpful for that. It gives you a curriculum to follow, structured labs to complete, and it really can help a faculty member get up to speed if needed. I understand we have a lot of highly skilled folks on the call, so that might not be applicable here, but I think it's worth mentioning because just based on my experience with different colleges, you kind of have different folks who specialize in different areas sometimes. And so if there is somebody who needs to get up to speed, I think it's a good way to approach it, but also for students. And so I mentioned our course in ethical hacking that we run our competition in currently aligns with the CompTIA Pen Test Plus. And so I think doing that helps us provide our students a solid roadmap and a solid curriculum with labs that are also well aligned with what industry is looking for. And so we really design our competition based around those competencies then. So that's something I recommend you think about as well. And the reason these certifications can be helpful is you kind of think about, as I mentioned earlier, how to narrow your focus. Give some thought to the idea of, okay, well, if I go out and look at the exam objectives for these certification exams, and these are just examples, this is not a comprehensive list. These are just some to think about. But if I look at those objectives, are there items on that list that I look at and I say, oh, this is really worth looking into. This is a good idea. This is something I would like my students to know after they take the competition. This is a skill I want to assess during it, that kind of thing. Some content providers, and I'm venturing to guess that a lot of folks have heard of these, but I wanted to mention them. So Cisco Networking Academy, I think a lot of colleges use that, but they have a huge portfolio of courses. They focus on CCNA, they have an A+, they have LPIC 1 courses that they partner with through another organization to bring in, but they also have cybersecurity courses, programming courses, I think Internet of Things courses. They have a lot of different courses, but it's a good content provider to look into if you're looking for a way to provide those skills to students in penetration testing, ethical hacking, cybersecurity, those kind of areas. CompTIA Academy, if you're not a member of that, I would recommend looking into it. And there's a couple of key benefits that come with that, in my opinion, that are really valuable. One would be discounted vouchers for your students on certification exams. There's also instructor vouchers that are available to support you to become certified in different exams. So those are a couple of big benefits. Another one is they have train the trainer opportunities, and that's exactly what it sounds like. So let's say they release a new version of a certification exam. They may have a train the trainer presentation, and really it's usually a series of presentations that may last a few weeks where they're seeking to train instructors so that they can then train students. And those are valuable. Participated in that before, and those opportunities are available. Network Development Group, NDG. I imagine a lot of folks on the call have heard of this as well, but they're a good lab provider. They've focused on Cisco, CCNA type courses for a long time, but they've expanded their portfolio over the years to include ethical hacking, digital forensics, Security Plus, and other areas. And they've really stepped up as of late and have provided some really quality labs in those areas. So I think they're worth checking out if you're looking for kind of a ready-made solution. And Practice Labs I put on the list as well. They're a resource we have used in the past, and it's similar to NDG in a way in that it provides a step-by-step environment that's very intuitive, that students can follow steps and complete tasks in. And also it's a good way if you have instructors, like I mentioned before, that need to get up to speed for them to pick up some of these skills. So this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the providers we've worked with that we've found valuable in helping us not only prepare to teach our students, but students learning the skills as well. And I put develop your own on the list. And I did this because that's what we ended up doing to prepare our students for the competition. So as I mentioned, the ethical hacking course aligns with the CompTIA Pen Test Plus certification, which is great. And they have some great labs that we use as part of that course. But we wanted to develop our own labs that specifically prepared students for our competition with outcomes we wanted to make sure that they kind of walked away with. So that's what we chose to do. So we developed a lab series of 7 different labs that do that. So I think that's something to consider. It'll give you the ability to customize the control and really point out and be detailed in the things you want students to take away and understand. So how to create a lab environment for a cybersecurity competition. Touch on a few things here. I put virtualization on the list again, just to emphasize that again, just because I'd strongly advise that you just check it out anyway and see what you think. I think most of the competitions I'm aware of use virtualization, but I think it's the way to go. Lots of advantages. So as you build your virtual operating system, when we did this, what we wanted to do and the way we looked at it and thought about it was we wanted to do it with Windows 10. And honestly, at some point here, it'll be Windows 11, not yet, but eventually. And the reason being is we wanted to show students, and I think it's important that they understand that a modern operating system has vulnerabilities and they can be exploited. And we really wanted to make sure our students understood that and could see that on modern operating systems rather than using something like, say, Windows XP or Windows 7, which obviously haven't had security patches for a number of years. So we wanted to make sure students really understood that. Now, as you're building that vulnerable operating system, one thing you can use to help narrow down what you want to focus on, vulnerabilities you want them to exploit, your students, is to use vulnerability databases. And I put a link, I think this will get distributed after the presentation to everybody. I'll send it to Mark. But doing this is very helpful because it'll give you details on vulnerabilities and really a huge list of known ones. And in some cases, this isn't the only one. There are others. In some cases, some of the databases will provide the exploit and the vulnerable application, which is valuable, right? Because then you can download those and try them. And so that's a good way to find vulnerabilities to test and then maybe include in your competition. Use quality penetration testing tools. So Kali Linux is what we elected to use. That is certainly not the only tool available. I just wanted to put one on the list to give you something to consider, but I'm sure other folks are mindful of many others that they found useful. And so this is just one idea, but we had a lot of success with it. Test very thoroughly. And so just the reason I mention that is because when you get into this and students start the competition and they start competing and they're really going through the paces, they're going to be trying all kinds of commands, really attacking your victim machine in every way they can. And what you don't want to have happen if you can is you don't want them to bring down that victim machine altogether to where it's not functional, because then you have to get it going again. And so really just test your victim machine and your attack machine and the challenges you want them to complete thoroughly and put it through the paces so that you don't end up with a bunch of issues on competition day whenever you start it. A few tools I just wanted to mention briefly, just to give you an idea of how we approached our competition and some of the things we wanted our students to be able to accomplish at the end of it. So one thing is we wanted students to be able to perform some recon steps and some scanning. And so we wanted students to, for instance, use Nmap to identify active clients on a network. So we place the student attack machine on a network along with maybe some other devices. And we'd say, identify the active clients on the network, maybe identify a DNS server. identify the client that has this open port, those kinds of things. Helps them understand how to do that and just identify those things. And really, another thing we wanted them to do after that, so after you can identify those clients, is can you identify vulnerabilities on them? And that's where Nessus comes in. And so Nessus is a tool I would recommend you look into if you're interested in this, just see if it's something you're interested in. And the reason I mention that is they have an education program and it is of no cost at this time. And I don't have any indication that's going to change, but it's a quality tool. And students in our competition would use Nessus to identify vulnerabilities on clients. And then once they're able to do that, or if they're able to do that, which of those can they exploit? And that's where Metasploit comes in. And so at the end of your vulnerability scan, you might have a list of vulnerabilities, and maybe you students would focus on the ones that are high risk or medium risk. And out of those, which of those have exploits available within Metasploit? And then which of those can you actually use to exploit the vulnerable client? And then after you're able to exploit the vulnerable client, we have students do things like, can they escalate privileges? Or can they copy files from that system? Can they take a screenshot of the desktop? Can they dump the hashes so they can crack passwords? Things like that, more invasive things. And so that, just to give you an idea of kind of some of the things that we have students do. And just a few screenshots that I'll just give you these are from our labs we developed, not the competition itself, but the labs. So here, a student would scan for open ports on the network using Nmap. And this is from Nessus from one of our labs. And so nice tool that identifies vulnerabilities, as you can see. And so your student would get a list like that, and they could identify which vulnerabilities they wanted to try and actually exploit based on their results. And then this is from Metasploit. In this example, actually, you see we're using command line called MSF Venom there. And what we're doing is we're creating a malicious executable that will establish a command shell back to our attacking station. That's what the first screenshot is. And then in the second screenshot, the attacking client actually runs that executable file that's malicious, and it does establish a command session back to our attacking station. So those are just some brief examples there. And I think we have about 6 minutes left. So I think the timing worked out mostly all right there.
So Rhonda asks, is there a cost involved in any of this that you've been presenting that you can?
Sure. It's going to just depend on which direction you decide to go, right? And what infrastructure you have in place. So if you have something like a vSphere environment already set up, you're really, the costs are going to be nothing to really set up your client and attack machine. Now, if you have a room full of physical machines, then you still can do that. And I think it'll still work just fine. We didn't do it that way, but you can use a product like VirtualBox, which is free to set up your machines. Then it's just a matter, like Kali Linux is free. Windows you can download. And if you may have valid ISO or valid license keys for that as well. If not, they have evaluation versions and things. But those are all options. So I think costs, it's going to depend on if you need to purchase any infrastructure to make things work. And then if you decide to pursue any of the certifications from content providers, they may have costs associated with them as well.
So Andrew, do you have any experience using Capture the Flag for local competitions like this?
We have not done that yet. No. So hopefully at some point, maybe in the future, but we're not there yet.
Yes, this is Rhonda. I have a quick one.
Go ahead. Yes.
I was wondering, when you talked about the Windows and having the evaluation, what I've noticed in some of my labs is that certain functions aren't available underneath the evaluations. And I was wondering, have you ran into any issues with that?
Great question. And so we haven't, but so we use activated copies. So we have, volume licensing here. And so we activate all of ours. So we haven't had to do that in our case.
Okay, thank you. We have that here as well. The only thing is in my labs, when I set up in a virtual box, I don't necessarily go that avenue because it's a little bit harder of a process. And so that's kind of why I was asking about that. Thank you, though.
Sure. Understand. Yeah. Then I could see where that gets a little more challenging, because I personally haven't tested the extent to which, if you haven't activated, what features you lose there. And so that would be a good thing to know and test out for sure.
Helen says, if you do attend sessions of the CompTIA Train the Trainer course, you will get a free voucher for the exam.
Excellent. That's actually news to me, but that's excellent. But CompTIA Academy, yes, I would recommend, if you're not a member, look into it. I think it'll be valuable for you to join.